I always believed my life was predictable, maybe even boring in that safe, controlled way a person chooses when they've been burned before. I was 34 years old, the owner of Larkspur Vintage and Design, a quiet shop near Montgomery's historical district, where I spent my days restoring forgotten furniture and my nights convincing myself that I didn't need anyone. My world was calm, simple, manageable, exactly the kind of life you build when you're done with chaos. But fate has an odd way of slipping a match into the neat order you create. It happened on a blistering Monday afternoon as I browsed through Montgomery's oldest antique fair, a sprawling maze of dust, stories, and relics that smelled like varnish, sun-heated brass, and memories. I wasn't looking for anything special that day. I was only running from the heavy silence of my apartment, where the echoes of past heartbreaks tended to grow louder at night. I wandered through stalls lightly, my fingers brushing frames, pottery, forgotten trinkets, until something pulled me to a halt. A 1916 navigation compass, brass polished by time, yet somehow gleaming as if waiting for me. I reached for it, already imagining how it would fit into my newest restoration project, when a hand touched mine, delicate, cold, and certain. "Careful," a voice murmured, low and perfectly measured, like someone accustomed to being listened to. "That piece has a temper." I turned, and everything inside me shifted just slightly, like the world exhaled. She stood there with storm-gray eyes that looked like they held secrets and answers no one ever gave me. Tall, elegant, dressed in a dark maroon blouse tucked neatly into tailored trousers, she looked more like a professor or a visiting diplomat than an antique hunter. Her hair, black, smooth, tucked behind one ear, made her eyes look even sharper. "It doesn't like being handled by people who underestimate it," she added, a small knowing smile curling the corner of her lips. "Do you?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her smile deepened, amused. "I never underestimate anything," she said, "especially not things made to survive time." There was something unnerving about how she looked at me, not flirtatious, not bold, just aware, like she could read the questions forming before I shaped them. "I'm Rowan," she said finally, offering her hand. "Dr. Rowan Hale. I'm a behavioral scientist at the State Research Institute." I blinked, a scientist, at an antique market. "This is your hobby?" I asked. "Studying human behavior isn't a hobby," she replied. "It just happens to bring me to the most interesting places." She nodded toward the compass still in my hand. "And the most interesting people." Heat pricked the back of my neck. I didn't know this woman, and yet there was a gravity to her, a strange familiarity that felt like déjà vu mixed with danger. "I'm Mara Lee," I said, clearing my throat. "I restore vintage pieces, furniture mostly, sometimes instruments." "Beautiful work," she said instantly. My brows rose. "You've seen it." "I know who you are," she answered simply, then turned back to the compass as if she hadn't just said something deeply confusing. "Your craftsmanship is intentional. You fix things as if they're alive." My heart knocked against my ribs. "How do you know that?" "Because you restore things the same way you protect yourself," she murmured, carefully, quietly, without announcing that something was broken in the first place. I stiffened. "Is this normal for you?" I said. "Analyzing strangers in antique markets, only the ones who look like they need someone to finally see them." My breath hitched, not romantically, not dramatically, but in the way someone reacts when an unexpected truth touches a place they didn't realize was tender. Before I could think of a response, Rowan lifted the compass, inspecting it with reverence. "Do you know its history?" she asked. "Not yet." "Then let me show you something." Her fingers brushed my wrist, feather-light, sending electricity up my arm, and she guided me to an old chart table placed under the shade of a flapping tent. She opened the compass, and inside, instead of the usual engravings, was a handwritten symbol, a spiral intersected with a line. "What does it mean?" I murmured. "It's not nautical," she whispered. "It's personal." "Personal," she nodded. "Someone marked this for someone they cared about. It was a message or a warning." Her thumb traced the symbol as if it carried weight. "Compasses don't just tell you where to go," Rowan said softly. "Sometimes they tell you who you're meant to find." Her eyes rose to meet mine, something warm, something frightening, something I wasn't ready for. Then she said the words that would change everything. "Mara, this compass belonged to a woman who disappeared 23 years ago, and she had your last name." I stepped back as if the ground shifted. "My last name?" "Yes," Rowan's voice gentled. "And I think you deserve to know why," my pulse thundered. "How do you even know that?" "Because," she said, "I've been looking for the person connected to this symbol for years, and the moment I saw you, I knew." I shook my head. "That doesn't make sense. I don't know anything about a missing woman." "You wouldn't. You were 11 when she vanished." "Who?" I demanded. Rowan looked at me with a softness that somehow hurt more than fear. "Your aunt, Liana Lee." My stomach dropped. I staggered forward, grabbing the edge of the table. "Rowan, what are you talking about?" "Let me explain," she said gently. "But not here. Come with me. We need privacy." "Why?" Rowan leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that made every hair on my arms rise. Because someone else has been looking for this compass too. And the moment they realize it's in your hands, they won't wait until Tuesday to come for you. I stared at her, this strange, intense scientist who somehow knew my name, my family, and wounds I never spoke aloud. A woman who felt like a warning and a lifeline wrapped into one. Somewhere inside me, instinct screamed to run. But something deeper whispered that fate had finally arrived, wearing a maroon blouse, storm-gray eyes, and a voice that could unravel secrets buried for decades. And so, against all logic, all caution, all the walls I had spent years building, I followed her. Because whatever truth she held, it was about me. And fate doesn't knock twice. I didn't know where Rowan was taking me, but I followed her anyway, guided by a strange mixture of fear, instinct, and the undeniable pull of someone who seemed to know more about my life than I ever dared to uncover. The antique market buzzed around us like nothing unusual had happened, but for me the air felt heavier, thick with the weight of a history I had never asked to inherit. Rowan walked with controlled urgency, her strides long, confident, like she'd planned this moment for years. When we reached her car, a sleek black sedan that looked out of place among the dusty pickup trucks, she opened the passenger door for me without a word. I hesitated for a breath too long. Rowan noticed. "You're safe with me," she said, voice low but strangely tender. "If you weren't, I would never have approached you in public." That sentence both comforted and terrified me. I slid into the seat, the car smelling faintly of cedar and something floral that felt like her, clean, confident, grounded. As the engine hummed to life, Rowan drove without speaking, her eyes fixed on the road, jaw tense as if she was trying to decide how much truth to give me without breaking me all at once. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged like the air before a storm. After several minutes, I leaned back, clutching the compass in my lap. The brass felt warmer than it had earlier, as if it carried its own pulse. Finally, Rowan spoke. "You said no one ever told you about your aunt." "My family barely talked about anything real," I answered flatly. "They were professionals at silence, at hiding things. I guess I learned from the best." Rowan nodded, her fingers tightening around the steering wheel. "Leona Lee disappeared when you were a child. 23 years ago, the case was never solved. No leads, no closure, not even a trace. It was like she evaporated. And the compass, found in an abandoned research cabin 12 years after she vanished." I stared at her. "How does that connect to me?" "Because," Rowan said, glancing at me with those storm-colored eyes, "the symbol inside the compass isn't random. It's a neurological mark, coded shorthand, used only by researchers at the Behavioral Cognition Institute in the late 80s. I blinked. Meaning your aunt was part of a research project that was shut down and buried, a project that might have involved human behavioral mapping. My heart hammered. "Mapping. Patterns," Rowan explained. "Predictability, decision paths, trauma responses. In simple terms, they tried to measure what choices a person would make before they made them." I sat in stunned silence. "You're telling me my aunt was experimenting on people?" "Not in the way you're imagining," Rowan said quickly. "She wasn't harming anyone. She was brilliant, empathetic, a visionary. Her work could have changed trauma therapy forever, but someone didn't want that research to survive." We pulled into a side road surrounded by tall pines, sunlight slipping through the branches in long, slanted beams. At the end of the gravel path stood a small wooden cabin, worn, abandoned, leaning slightly like it carried a secret too heavy for its frame. Rowan parked the car and inhaled deeply before turning to me. "This is where the compass was found." A chill ran up my spine. "Why bring me here?" "Because you need to see what she left behind." She stepped out of the car, waiting for me by the door, her posture steady but her expression softer now, as though she was afraid she might be hurting me with truths I didn't ask for. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust, aging wood, and something faintly metallic. The light filtered through cracks in the walls, making floating dust look like falling snow. Papers were scattered across the small table. Some were pinned to the walls, their edges yellowed. A metal filing box lay open on the floor, its contents half pulled out, as if someone had searched it in a hurry. Rowan's voice gentled as she walked toward the table. "I've spent years collecting pieces of her research. These notes," she gestured around the room, "weren't here the last time I came. Someone has been searching." A pulse of fear thudded in my chest. "Searching for what?" Rowan stepped closer, her presence somehow steadying. "For the same thing your aunt was searching for." "Which is," she hesitated, "a pattern that didn't exist in any subject except one." My breath caught. "Who?" Rowan looked at me with devastating calm. "You." A cold wave rushed through my body. "Me? I was a child. I barely remember her." "Exactly," Rowan said quietly, "but she remembered you. She watched you closely, not in a manipulative way, in a protective way. She saw something in you, something she couldn't explain, something she thought could change everything." Rowan, that doesn't make sense. It does, she whispered, taking the compass from my trembling hand. This symbol. It represents a behavioral anomaly, someone who consistently chooses empathy over survival instinct, someone whose emotional patterns don't align with trauma conditioning, someone whose brain responds to stress differently than anyone she ever studied. You're saying my aunt thought I was some kind of experiment? No, Rowan whispered firmly. She thought you were the key to proving that healing isn't linear, that resilience isn't inherited, that some people, for reasons we don't understand, rise instead of breaking. Emotion tightened in my chest. Anger, confusion, grief for a woman I barely knew. Why didn't anyone tell me? Rowan looked at me with something like sorrow. Because someone erased her research, and because your family was warned not to ask questions. I leaned against the cabin wall, trying to breathe through the whirlwind of revelations. With every word Rowan spoke, my childhood memories shifted, reshaping, realigning. I remembered flashes now, a soft voice telling me stories, a warm hand brushing my hair back, a woman who smelled like lavender calling me her little compass. I swallowed hard. She called me that, I whispered. Compass. Rowan closed her eyes briefly. She must have known. Known what? I demanded. Rowan exhaled slowly, her eyes finally lifting to mine, eyes full of answers that felt too heavy to carry alone. That one day you would need help finding your way back from something. My breath trembled. Finding my way back from what? Yourself, Rowan murmured. Your past, your fear, your habit of disappearing emotionally before someone can leave you. My throat tightened painfully because every word was true and she couldn't possibly know that unless she had studied me. Or seen through me in a way no one ever had. How do you know all this? I asked, almost desperate. Rowan stepped closer, her voice low, steady, uncomfortably intimate. Because I've lived inside the patterns of people just like you for years. Because your aunt dedicated her life to understanding the one child she believed could prove hope is innate, not learned. And because the first time I looked at you, you felt familiar. Something in her confession reached deep into me, touching a part I didn't let people see, a part I labeled weakness. Suddenly, the air between us wasn't just charged with mystery anymore. It pulsed with something unspoken, warm and terrifying. I stepped back instinctively. Rowan froze, the hurt in her eyes immediate but restrained. I'm not here to push you, she said softly. I'm here because you deserve the truth. And what truth is that? Rowan hesitated, the first real crack in her perfect composure. Someone is looking for this compass, someone dangerous, someone who destroyed your aunt's research before, and if they know it's in your hands, her voice shook for the first time. They will come for you too. My chest tightened. Why, I'm nobody. Rowan shook her head. You're the only person who carries the one thing they couldn't erase, an inherited understanding your aunt spent her life trying to protect. You are the last piece of her work. I stared at her, barely breathing. Fear swelled in my throat, but not the kind that paralyses. It was the kind that awakens something dormant. What do we do now? I whispered. Rowan stepped closer, slowly, carefully, her hand lifting as if to reassure me, but stopping inches from my arm, respecting my boundaries even when her eyes begged to comfort me. We stay ahead of them, she said. We find out what your aunt discovered, we finish her work, and we protect you. My voice trembled. Why do you care so much? Rowan swallowed hard, and her answer was the softest, rawest thing she had said all day. Because the moment I saw you, Myra, I knew I was meant to. Before I could respond, before I could breathe, a shadow moved outside the broken cabin window. A crunch of gravel. Rowan froze, eyes sharp, body tense. She grabbed my wrist, her voice barely audible. Myra, we're not alone. The wooden floor creaked under a deliberate step outside the door. Another, then silence. Rowan's grip tightened, and in that suspended breath between fear and action, I realized something undeniable. I trusted her more than I trusted my own memories. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. And my life, the quiet, predictable life I once clung to, shattered in a single heartbeat. The doorknob turned with the slow, deliberate groan of old metal moving against wood swollen from years of rain and time. I felt my breath leave me in a silent gasp as Rowan's hand slid across my back, anchoring me like a lifeline stretched across a crumbling ledge. Neither of us moved, our bodies held still by the weight of that moment. Two women in a decaying cabin full of forgotten research, gripping a brass compass that had led us to the edge of something vast and dangerous. The door didn't open fully at first. It creaked, shifted, then paused as if whoever stood outside was waiting to hear the change in our breathing, the tremble of panic neither of us dared voice. Rowan's eyes were locked on the crack of light in the frame, her entire body positioned slightly in front of mine, protective, sharp, completely different from the calm scientist I'd met just a day before. And then the door creaked open wider, letting in a wedge of dying sunlight, and a figure stepped in. A woman, tall, mid-50s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and hair tied back so tightly it made her already severe face look carved from iron. She wore a beige trench coat despite the heat, and her eyes scanned the room with a practiced chill that made my skin crawl. "Rowan," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as glass. "I thought I told you to stay away from this case." Rowan didn't flinch. "It's not a case anymore, Lydia, it's her life." Lydia's eyes shifted to me with disinterest first, then something else, recognition, calculation. I couldn't tell. "You must be Mara," she said flatly, as though she already knew the answer. "You look like your aunt, same fire under the surface." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "Lydia Shaw," she replied. "Special investigations. I worked with your aunt, briefly." Rowan tensed beside me. "She wasn't just your colleague, she was your friend. You're the one who found the compass." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "That was a long time ago." "Not long enough," Rowan snapped. "You think showing up here unannounced helps?" "I think showing up here is necessary," Lydia replied. "Because you're about to get both of you killed if you don't start thinking like a professional instead of someone playing rescuer." The tension in the room turned molten. I felt like I was standing between two electric wires sparking with history I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice raw. Lydia turned to me. "To help you survive what your aunt didn't." Rowan stepped between us then. "No, you're not here to help. You're here to bury what's left before someone else finds it." Lydia's mouth twisted in a bitter smirk. "Still so dramatic, just like Liana." That name, my aunt's name, spoken so casually, so carelessly, snapped something in me. "You knew her," I whispered. Lydia turned to face me fully now, and something flickered across her cold features, a ghost of grief, perhaps, or something even older. "I did," she said. "She was brilliant, obsessive, reckless. She didn't know when to stop." "What happened to her?" I asked, my throat tightening. "Why did she disappear?" Lydia hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a weathered envelope. She held it out to me. "Because she chose to disappear, and she left this for you, only you. I was told never to give it to anyone else." My hands shook as I took the envelope. It was thick, sealed with wax, and my name was written across the front in slanted, familiar handwriting that I hadn't seen since I was a child. "You had this all these years?" I asked. "Why now?" Lydia's expression was unreadable. "Because I thought you'd never find the compass. I thought maybe fate had done you a mercy, but you found it, and that means it's time." Rowan stepped forward, eyes on the envelope. "You could have protected her, Lydia. You could have stopped it." "You don't know what I could have done," Lydia snapped. "You only know the version of the story Liana let you see. She was brilliant, yes, but she was also dangerous. She crossed lines." "And so did the people who came after her," Rowan replied. "People who are still watching." Lydia didn't deny it. "You have 48 hours, she said, her voice now flat with finality. "After that, if you don't walk away, I won't be able to protect you." She turned and walked out without another word, leaving the door creaking in her wake and the envelope trembling in my hands. For a long moment, neither Rowan nor I spoke. The world outside had gone quiet again, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I finally looked at her. "Do I open it?" Rowan nodded slowly. "If you're ready." I broke the seal with hands that no longer felt like mine. Inside were several folded pages, a photograph, and something small wrapped in linen, a necklace, silver, with the same spiral symbol carved into its charm. I unfolded the first page. The writing was hurried but elegant, my aunt's unmistakable script. "To my compass," it began. "If you are reading this, it means the threads of time have brought you to where I always feared you'd go. I'm sorry, I wanted more for you. A simple life. A quiet one, but you are not a quiet soul, my love. You are meant to ask questions, to break cycles, and they will fear you for it." I read every word, my eyes blurring as the truth of a woman I barely knew spilled across my hands. How she had discovered a pattern in me that defied what her colleagues believed possible. How she was silenced by her own team when she refused to falsify her data. How she knew her work would one day resurface and bring danger to the one person she couldn't bear to lose. Rowan stood close but gave me space as I read. When I reached the last page, her fingers gently closed around mine, grounding me. "Mara," she whispered, "we can't stay here, we need to move. Now." I nodded, numb and shaking. As we drove away from the cabin, the trees swallowed the road behind us, and I felt like I was leaving behind more than a building. I was leaving behind the last fragments of the person I thought I was. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sit still. I paced while Rowan scanned the letter again, her brow furrowed, whispering the phrases under her breath. "She left a trail," she said. "This isn't just a goodbye, it's a map." "To what?" I asked. "To the missing research, to the truth she couldn't publish. She encoded it in you, in your memory, in your patterns. That's why they were watching you even before you knew they existed." A chill ran down my spine. "Who is they?" "Rowan, you keep saying they. Who are they?" Rowan hesitated, A private division, they fund experimental psychology and neuroscience projects. When results threaten their control, they bury them. Sometimes the scientists, sometimes the data, sometimes both. And you? I asked, fear twisting in my chest. What are you? Rowan looked at me then, eyes suddenly fragile in a way I hadn't seen before. I used to be one of them. The room went still, my mind reeled. You were part of that. Years ago, she said softly. Before I knew what they really did, I left when I saw what happened to your aunt. I've been trying to undo their work ever since. I sat down heavily on the couch, the envelope clutched against my chest. So what now? We run? Rowan shook her head. No, we uncover everything. We finish what your aunt started. And if they come for us, we show them what happens when a woman stops being afraid of her own past. I looked at her then, this scientist, this stranger, this unexpected protector, and something inside me aligned for the first time in years. Rowan, why did you really find me? She walked over, knelt in front of me, her hand resting lightly on my knee. Because you're not just the key to buried research. You're the reason I remembered who I wanted to be, and I think you're the reason I still believe in what's possible. Her voice trembled slightly. And because since the moment I saw you holding that compass, I haven't been able to breathe right without you. I reached for her hand then, and when our fingers touched, it wasn't dramatic or earth-shattering. It was quiet, steady, like a light finally finding its source. But even in that moment of warmth, we both knew the clock was ticking. Somewhere out there, people were watching. The spiral had been opened. The map had been activated. And the woman I was becoming, the one who would face them, was no longer willing to hide in anyone's shadow. The echo in her voice. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. My mind spun in endless circles as I sat on the couch with the envelope of my aunt's secrets pressed against my chest like a shield against the past. The dimness of my living room made everything feel sharper, the ticking of the old wall clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the weight of fear inside my ribs. Rowan stayed awake too, sitting on the opposite end of the couch, her elbows on her knees, her eyes studying the compass on the coffee table as if waiting for it to whisper its last remaining truths. The air between us felt thick with unspoken questions, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from finding out your entire life was shaped by invisible hands. At one point, I looked at Rowan, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw the cracks in her calm facade, the fatigue etched in the shadows beneath her eyes, and the tension gripping her shoulders as though she was waiting for something terrible to burst through the walls at any moment. She wasn't just protecting me, she was terrified for me. And that realization softened something deep inside my chest. As dawn crept into the room with the faintest glow, Rowan finally sat back and exhaled, her voice rough with the kind of vulnerability she rarely let slip through. We need to leave, she murmured. Now, I whispered, hugging my knees. They won't move at night, she said, but morning is when they start watching again. Surveillance teams start their rounds, digital traffic spikes. Anything you search, any call you make, any movement, they'll see it. My throat tightened. Why are they coming after me? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a threat, I restore furniture. Rowan shook her head gently. Your aunt didn't believe you were just anything. She believed you were the anomaly the research world didn't understand, the one person whose patterns couldn't be predicted, and unpredictability is the one thing the organization can't control. My stomach twisted. How can someone's decisions be predictable? Rowan's eyes glimmered with something like sorrow. Trauma, history, environment. Most people move according to patterns shaped by their past. But once in a generation, someone emerges who doesn't follow the logic trauma dictates. Someone who doesn't break where they should. Someone who doesn't run where they should. Someone who chooses empathy even when survival instinct says otherwise. Her eyes met mine, steady and unbearably soft. Your aunt thought you were one of those people. I didn't know what to do with that kind of burden, being told that a woman I barely remembered had placed all her hope on a child who grew into someone afraid of her own reflection. I don't feel special, I whispered. Rowan moved closer, her voice lowering to something almost intimate. That's exactly why you are. Before I could answer, the silence in the room changed, a shift so subtle that it felt like the air itself held its breath. Rowan's head snapped toward the window. She stood instantly, her movements swift, precise, trained. Someone's outside, she whispered. Fear shot through me. Who? Not Lydia, she said. Someone less patient. She grabbed the compass, tucked the envelope into her jacket, and reached out to me without hesitation. We're leaving now. My heart hammered as she guided me through the back door of my apartment, every step landing like thunder in my ears. The hallway outside felt colder than it should have, and my bare feet stuck slightly to the tiles as we crept toward the stairwell. Rowan kept one hand lightly on my back, her body always angled protectively as if she could shield me from bullets, shadows, or the ghosts we were running from. When we reached the bottom of the stairwell, she paused, listening. I held my breath, my fingers trembling around the railing. Then from above us, a faint metallic click echoed, one I recognized only because it didn't belong. The sound of a door latch sliding open. Rowan tensed. "They're inside," she whispered. "Move." She pushed the exit door open, and the rush of fresh morning air hit me like freedom and terror at the same time. Outside, the street was quiet in that early-hour stillness where the world hasn't fully woken. Rowan's car was parked half a block away, and she kept her arm around me as she hurried us toward it, her eyes constantly scanning the rooftops, the windows, the corners of buildings. "Rowan," I whispered shakily, "how do you know what they'll do? How do you know how to avoid them?" She didn't answer right away. She unlocked the car, ushered me in quickly, and slid behind the wheel. Only after we pulled away from the curb, tires barely making a sound, did she finally speak. "Because I was trained the same way they were," she said softly. "And because once I was meant to be the one tracking your aunt." My breath caught. "You were meant to hunt her." Rowan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I was meant to observe her, predict her, but she wasn't predictable. She slipped away from every team, disappeared off every radar, and left traces only where she wanted them found. I admired her long before I knew her, and when I finally met her," Rowan's voice faltered, and that vulnerability twisted inside me. "She changed everything I believed about human behavior." We drove for nearly an hour, leaving the city behind and moving into quiet rural roads lined with tall pines and wide-open fields. "Where are we going?" I asked eventually. "To someone we can trust." I wasn't convinced such a person existed in our world anymore, but we kept driving until Rowan turned onto a dirt path leading to a small property tucked behind acres of trees. A weathered farmhouse sat at the far end, surrounded by fields and a line of sunflowers that bent softly in the morning breeze. "Who lives here?" I asked. Rowan parked the car and turned to me. "Someone who helped your aunt when no one else would, someone who paid a price for it." The front door opened before we even stepped out. An older woman stepped onto the porch, late 70s, wiry gray hair, sharp eyes that took in everything at once. Her posture was straight, defiant, carved from decades of knowing more than most people survived learning. "Rowan Hale," she said, her voice firm despite her age. "I knew you'd come dragging trouble behind you." Rowan gave a small bow of respect. "Mrs. Arden." The woman's eyes moved to me then and softened instantly. "You," she murmured. "You're Liana's compass." I froze. "You knew my aunt?" "Knew her." Mrs. Arden laughed, though it was hollowed out by grief. "She saved my daughter's life twice." She motioned us inside. The house smelled of herbs, paper, and something sweet simmering on the stove. A soft warmth filled the space, the kind that made the chaos outside feel briefly distant. As we sat at her kitchen table, Rowan handed her the letter. Mrs. Arden read it quietly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "She was right," she murmured. "Everything she feared is happening." She looked at Rowan. "What do you need?" Rowan leaned forward. "The tapes, the ones from the cabin." Mrs. Arden stiffened. "They're dangerous." "So is silence," Rowan replied. After a long moment, the older woman rose, walked to a cupboard, and unlocked a hidden compartment behind stacks of jars. She pulled out a small metal box, old, dented, heavy with history. "These are the last recordings your aunt made before she disappeared," she said to me gently. "They were meant for you." My fingers trembled as I opened the box. Inside were 3 old cassette tapes, each labeled in my aunt's handwriting. Compass Part 1, Compass Part 2, Compass Final. I stared at them, my heart pounding. Mrs. Arden touched my arm lightly. "Whatever truth you find in those tapes, know this: your aunt loved you more fiercely than she loved her own research. Every decision she made, even the ones that broke her, were made to protect you." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Rowan reached over and covered my hand with hers, her thumb gently brushing the back of my palm. Her touch grounded me in ways I didn't understand yet but felt deeply. "We'll listen to them together," she said. I nodded. Before we could set up the old tape player, Mrs. Arden brought out. A sudden crash echoed from outside, the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting wood. Mrs. Arden's face drained of color. Rowan stood so fast her chair toppled over. "They found us," she whispered. "How?" I gasped. "Your apartment," Rowan said quickly. "They tracked movement patterns. They know you changed direction halfway through town. They know you're with someone who knows how to evade them." She grabbed my hand. "We have to move now." Mrs. Arden shoved the tapes into my bag. "Go," she said urgently. "I'll stall them. I've done it before." "You can't," Rowan whispered fiercely. "They won't hesitate this time." Mrs. Arden's jaw clenched. "Neither will I." Before I could protest, Rowan pulled me toward the back door. But as we reached it, I froze because outside, through the thin curtain, I saw a shadow move across the yard. Slow, deliberate, far too familiar. And then, just as the world narrowed to a needle point of fear, I realized something horrifying. The figure approaching wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone from the organization. It wasn't one of the hunters Rowan had warned me about. It was Lydia Shaw. And she wasn't alone. Rowan cursed under her breath, pulling me back from the door. "It's a trap," she whispered. "She didn't come to protect you, she came to finish what she started years ago." My breath trembled, my chest tightened. The tapes, the compass, my aunt's truth, all of it was converging in this small farmhouse at the edge of nowhere. Rowan pulled me close, her voice just a thread of sound. "Mara, whatever happens next, I won't let them take you." But when the back door handle began to turn, slow, inevitable, I understood one thing with painful clarity. They weren't here for Rowan. They weren't here for Mrs. Arden. They were here for me. And the moment that door opened, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The tapes that should never be heard. The moment the back door handle began to move, everything inside me went silent, not silent, but the kind of terrifying void before impact, when every instinct inside your body screams without making a sound. Rowan's hand tightened around my wrist, and even though she didn't speak, her grip carried a promise. She was ready to fight. Mrs. Arden moved toward the kitchen counter with surprising swiftness for a woman her age, her fingers closing around what looked like a heavy iron candlestick. She didn't look frightened. She looked furious. And then the door swung open, slow at first, as if whoever was entering wanted us to feel the dread before the arrival, and Lydia Shaw stepped inside with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. She didn't raise a weapon. She didn't shout. She simply walked in as if she owned the right to enter any space touched by my aunt's legacy. Her eyes scanned us 1, 2, 3, and settled on me with that same cold certainty she'd shown in the cabin. "Mara," she said, her voice steady, almost gentle. "You shouldn't be here, none of you should." Rowan's body moved in front of mine instinctively, a protective barrier I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "You lied to us," Rowan said, her voice low. "You said you wanted to help her, you said you wanted to protect her." Lydia exhaled, not with guilt but with disappointment, like we had betrayed her. "Rowan, you always had a talent for misinterpreting orders," she said. "I came to protect the research, not the girl." The anger that rose in me was sharp enough to cut through the fear. "I'm not a girl," I snapped, "and that research is my life, my aunt's life, not yours to own." Lydia's eyes hardened into something colder. "It was your aunt's mistake to involve family. She knew the rules, she broke them. And you," she said, stepping closer, "are the last loose thread." Mrs. Arden slammed the candlestick onto the counter, the metal hitting wood like thunder. "Lydia, don't you dare touch that child." Lydia didn't flinch. "Child," she said quietly. "She's a 34-year-old woman with a neurological anomaly that could destabilize years of behavioral modeling if exposed. She's not a child, she's evidence." Rowan's breath trembled, not with fear, but with rage. "You don't get to call her that." "You used to call her that," Lydia countered. "Your reports," Rowan stiffened. "Those were before I knew her, before I knew what they were doing." Lydia's tone sharpened. "You knew exactly what we were doing, and you walked away before the work was finished. I stayed." Rowan stepped forward, her jaw taut. "You didn't stay out of loyalty. You stayed because you couldn't admit she beat you. Liana outsmarted your entire division, and you never forgave her." Lydia's expression cracked for the first time, not fully. Just enough to show that the truth, once spoken, still hurt. Standoff froze the air between us. I felt like I was standing at the center of a storm made of old loyalties, broken promises, and long-buried wounds that were now ripping open. Lydia turned back to me, her gaze calculating. "Mara, hand me the tapes." My fingers reflexively tightened around my bag. "No," I whispered. Lydia sighed, a long, tired sound that chilled me more than her threats. "If you listen to those tapes without guidance, you won't survive what you hear." Rowan took a step forward. "You don't get to decide that for her." Lydia's mouth curled in a bitter half-smile. "Still protecting people who don't understand the weight of what they are." "You don't understand her," Rowan said sharply. "You never did." Lydia's eyes flashed. "Oh, I understand her far better than you do. I've been studying her since she was 11. The room seemed to tilt. "Studying me?" I whispered, a nauseating dread crawling up my spine. Lydia looked almost sympathetic, almost. "Your aunt asked me to," she said softly. "She was terrified someone would take her research, manipulate it. She wanted someone she trusted to monitor you from a distance, to make sure you didn't end up where she did." "And where did she end up?" I demanded. Lydia didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was a shadow. "She ended up alone. Hunted and eventually gone." My chest tightened painfully. "You let her die?" Lydia's face twisted, not with guilt, but with something uglier, denial. "She chose her fate. She chose to run. She chose to bury her work." Rowan stepped closer, tension radiating off her in waves. "No, Lydia, she chose to protect Mara, and you hated her for it." Before Lydia could respond, a new noise echoed outside, a low rumble like the vibration of engines approaching. Rowan's face drained of color. "They're here," she whispered. "Not just her team, the organization." Panic surged. Mrs. Arden grabbed my arm. "Basement," she said urgently. "Now." Rowan grabbed the tapes and the compass, stuffing them into her jacket as Lydia blocked the doorway. "You can't run," she hissed. "They have the house surrounded." Rowan's voice broke through the rising fear like a blade. "Then we don't run, we misdirect." She grabbed my hands, her eyes locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "Mara, listen to me. You're going to hear things in those tapes that will change everything you know about yourself, but you can't listen to them here. If they get those recordings, they'll own your story forever." My heart pounded. "Where do we go?" "Somewhere they won't predict," Rowan said. "Somewhere even your aunt couldn't map." Lydia's jaw tightened. "There is no such place." Rowan looked directly at her, and for the first time, Lydia's confidence cracked. "Oh, but there is," Rowan whispered. "It's the one variable your models could never account for." I didn't understand, not fully, but Rowan squeezed my hands again. "You," she said softly, "your instincts, your intuition, your unpredictability, you are the gap in their system, you are the blind spot." That realization shook me to my core. The very thing I had spent my whole life believing made me broken, my inconsistency, my fear-driven decisions, my emotional volatility, was the one thing that could save us. The sound outside grew louder, doors slamming, boots hitting gravel, low voices giving orders. Lydia backed away then, her face pale. "If you go out there, you won't make it 50 feet, she warned. Rowan stepped in front of me. "Then we won't go out the front door." She turned to Mrs. Arden. "Is the cellar tunnel still intact?" Mrs. Arden nodded grimly. "But it's unstable. If you choose it, you may not all come out." Rowan glanced at me. "We'll make it," Lydia spoke sharply. "Rowan, don't be reckless." "Reckless," Rowan snapped, "is waiting here to die." We moved toward the cellar door as the voices outside grew louder. Rowan pulled me down the steps and into the darkness, her flashlight flickering against damp stone walls and decades of dust. Mrs. Arden followed behind us, closing the door above, her frail silhouette the last thing I saw before we descended fully into the shadows. The air was cold, heavy with earth and something metallic, the smell of forgotten years. The tunnel stretched ahead, long and narrow, with wooden beams supporting the structure. As Rowan led the way, her flashlight creating a small circle of safety in the darkness, I felt the weight of everything pressing down, the lies, the research, the choices, the danger, the fear, and beneath it all, the haunting question my aunt left behind. Why me? About halfway through, Rowan stopped. "We can't use the car," she whispered. "They'll expect that. We'll go through the woods, follow the ridge east, and disappear into the old railway path." My breath trembled. "Where does that lead?" Rowan turned, her expression softened by the dim light. "To the truth," she said gently, "and to the place your aunt didn't want anyone but you to find." My pulse quickened. "Where?" Rowan took my hand, the touch warm, steady, grounding, and whispered, "Her last safe house." But before we could take another step, a distant voice echoed down the tunnel, too close, too familiar. Lydia. "Mara," she called, her tone almost pleading now. "You don't understand what's waiting for you out there." Rowan froze, her body tense. I squeezed her hand, my voice shaking. "We keep going," Rowan nodded. "Yes, because the only way out of this is through." As we continued deeper into the darkness, one thing settled in my chest like a quiet flame. I wasn't just running anymore. I wasn't just surviving. I wasn't just reacting. I was beginning to choose, and for the first time I understood what my aunt meant when she called me her compass. It wasn't because I needed direction. It was because I was the direction. And the world, dangerous, secretive, merciless, had finally realized it too. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching forward like a narrow throat, carved through decades of earth and secrets. The deeper Rowan and I moved, the darker and colder the air became, until each breath felt like drawing a memory from a place that had been untouched by sunlight for far too long. Mrs. Arden's footsteps behind us were steady despite her age, her quiet determination giving the space a strength I hadn't realized we needed, until the tunnel began to curve subtly, as though guiding us toward something deliberate. Rowan's flashlight swept over damp stone walls, wooden support beams bowing under the weight of soil, and markings I might have dismissed as age and erosion if they didn't occasionally resemble faint symbols, spirals, angles, fragmented circles. The same handwriting that had filled my aunt's notebook pages now carved, faint but determined, into stone. I moved behind Rowan, close enough to feel the brush of her shoulder each time she paused, each time she listened for approaching footsteps, each time she breathed out with the practiced patience of someone who had navigated danger so often it had become the shape of her shadow. Yet beneath that caution, I sensed something else in her, a quiet fear. not of the organization chasing us, not even of what we might find at the end of the tunnel. It was a fear that came from within, a fear of losing what she had found. A fear of losing me before she had even allowed herself to fully accept that she wanted me. When the tunnel finally opened into a wider cavern, my breath caught. The space was eerily beautiful, a hollow beneath the earth where tree roots hung down like frozen strands of hair and thin beams of sunlight filtered through cracks above, illuminating the cavern in pale gold. In the center sat an old railway maintenance cart, rusted but intact, sitting on what looked like a forgotten stretch of tracks leading into darkness. Mrs. Arden rested against the stone wall, catching her breath. "This line was abandoned before you were born," she whispered. "Liana used it when she needed to disappear without leaving footprints." Rowan ran her hand along the edge of the cart, her brow furrowed. "If we use this, we'll be miles away before the organization realizes which direction we took." I stared at the tracks disappearing into the abyss, a chill running down my arms. "Where does it lead?" Mrs. Arden looked at me with a tenderness that softened the sharp lines of her face. "To the last place your aunt called home." The idea felt surreal, that my aunt had lived an entire secret life, while I grew up unaware that every choice she made was tethered to my existence. My chest tightened with a mix of grief and gratitude, the kind that twists into a painful knot because it's too late to change anything, but not too late to finally understand. Rowan helped Mrs. Arden climb onto the cart while I stood frozen, staring at the compass in Rowan's hand, the symbol etched inside glowing faintly in the dim light as if reacting to the tunnel. I felt a pull not physical but emotional, like the compass was calling to something I had buried long ago. "Mara," Rowan said softly, her voice cutting through the fog of my thoughts. "Come on." I climbed into the cart beside her, and she placed her hand gently over mine. Her touch steadied the tremor in my fingers, grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed, until the cart began to roll forward, picking up speed as the tracks sloped downward into the unknown. The air grew colder as we rushed through the darkness, wind whipping against my face, carrying the faint scent of cedar and earth. I felt Rowan's arm circle around me, pulling me closer so I wouldn't lose balance, but her embrace wasn't just protective. It was instinctive, intimate, as if she needed the reassurance of my presence just as much as I needed hers. The tunnel walls blurred past us, punctuated occasionally by flashes of old brickwork, broken pipes, and the ghostly remnants of old rail infrastructure. It felt like we were moving back in time, following the same path my aunt had once taken when she knew her days were numbered and her enemies were closing in. Eventually the tracks leveled out and the tunnel widened again. The cart slowed until it rolled into a hidden underground station, small, forgotten, with moss-covered walls, broken signs, and benches turned to skeletons of wood. A single metal door stood at the far end, rusted but reinforced, as if guarding something sacred. Rowan was the first to step out, her flashlight illuminating faint words scratched into the metal. "For the one who finds her way." My breath hitched. "She left this for me," I whispered. Mrs. Arden nodded. "Liana knew they would come for her research. She knew she had to hide the truth somewhere only her compass could reach." Rowan placed her palm flat against the door. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft, almost reverent. I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if anyone could be, but I nodded anyway. Rowan and I pushed the door open together, and the moment it creaked wide, something inside the room shifted, dust swirling, the faintest whisper of old air greeting us like a secret resurfacing. The space inside was larger than I expected, part library, part laboratory, part sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls, filled with journals, tapes, maps, and framed photographs of cities I recognized and cities I didn't. A single desk sat in the center, papers spread across it like the abandoned thoughts of a mind that had been forced to flee mid-sentence. A blanket still hung over the back of the chair. It felt like she had left yesterday. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped into the room, overwhelmed by the scent of old paper, lavender, and something that unmistakably belonged to my aunt. A presence, a warmth, a memory preserved in air. My hands brushed the edge of her desk, trembling when my fingers landed on a small notebook with my name stamped on the cover. Not written, stamped. As if it had been prepared years ago, waiting for a moment she believed would eventually come. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages and pages of her handwriting, letters, instructions, layers of research, and personal notes about me. About what she saw in me, about why she feared the organization would come after me the moment I became old enough to understand the world beyond childhood innocence. Rowan stood close, reading over my shoulder without touching the notebook, giving me space but not distance. One page caught my eye. It was written differently, sharper, more frantic than the rest. If she is reading this, it means time has caught us. Rowan, protect her. She is not like the others. She feels beyond the models. She chooses beyond the patterns. She is the variable they cannot predict, the truth they fear, and she will break their system if given the chance. I looked at Rowan, my chest tightening. She trusted you, I whispered. She trusted me because I loved her, Rowan murmured, then shook her head. Not the way you think. I loved her mind, her courage, her refusal to bow to them. She changed me. She made me see what my work was doing to people. She saved me too. There was a trembling honesty in Rowan's voice, one that reached deep into me and settled there like a fragile truth waiting to be held gently. Before I could speak, Mrs. Arden gasped softly. She stood at a shelf near the back, holding a small device, a tape recorder, more modern than the cassettes. There's one more recording, she whispered. Rowan and I moved toward her. My fingers brushed the device, and when I pressed the play button, static filled the room. Then her voice, my aunt's voice, emerged, warm, calm, a voice from another time. Myra, my compass, if you're hearing this, the world has finally reached for you. I'm sorry. I wanted to give you a life untouched by the shadows of my work, but fate is stubborn. You must listen to Rowan. She carries the pieces I couldn't finish. And she cares for you in ways I hope you will let her. She will protect you. But only you can decide the path. Your heart is the pattern breaker. Your love is the thread that rewrites what they believe to be absolute. Trust it. Trust yourself. The recording ended. Silence wrapped the room in a heavy, sacred stillness. My knees weakened, and I reached out instinctively. Rowan caught me before I slipped. Her arms wrapped around me, holding me firmly against her chest, and for a moment the fear, the running, the danger melted into something else entirely. Something human, something warm, something safe. I felt the steady beat of her heart beneath my cheek. I felt the tremble in her breath as she held me just a little too tightly. I felt the truth my aunt had spoken. Rowan cared for me in ways that terrified both of us. And in that moment I realized something with startling clarity. I cared for her too. We stayed wrapped together like that until Mrs. Arden cleared her throat gently, reminding us that time, danger, and shadow still followed us. There's more, she said softly. Your aunt didn't just hide research here. She hid the one thing that can unravel the organization's entire model. Rowan's eyes sharpened. What is it? Mrs. Arden placed her hand on a wooden chest in the corner. The original data. Rowan inhaled sharply. If they get this, they'll reprogram the system, Mrs. Arden finished. Rewrite the patterns, control the next generation of behavior studies. I felt my pulse quicken. So what do we do? Rowan looked at me, only me. We make a choice, she said quietly. Not based on fear, not based on what they want, but based on who you choose to become. For the first time in my life, I understood something profound. The world wasn't waiting for someone extraordinary. It was waiting for someone willing to choose courage despite being afraid. Someone unpredictable. Someone who didn't break where she should have. My aunt believed that person was me. Rowan believed it too, and standing in the safe house my aunt had built from love and fear and hope, I finally believed it as well. But as Rowan reached for the chest to open it, footsteps echoed in the tunnel behind us, soft, controlled, approaching. Lydia had found us, and she wasn't alone. The tunnel seemed endless, stretching forward like a narrow throat, carved through decades of earth and secrets. The deeper Rowan and I moved, the darker and colder the air became, until each breath felt like drawing a memory from a place that had been untouched by sunlight for far too long. Mrs. Arden's footsteps behind us were steady despite her age, her quiet determination giving the space a strength I hadn't realized we needed, until the tunnel began to curve subtly, as though guiding us toward something deliberate. Rowan's flashlight swept over damp stone walls, wooden support beams bowing under the weight of soil, and markings I might have dismissed as age and erosion if they didn't occasionally resemble faint symbols, spirals, angles, fragmented circles. The same handwriting that had filled my aunt's notebook pages now carved, faint but determined, into stone. I moved behind Rowan, close enough to feel the brush of her shoulder each time she paused, each time she listened for approaching footsteps, each time she breathed out with the practiced patience of someone who had navigated danger so often it had become the shape of her shadow. Yet beneath that caution, I sensed something else in her, a quiet fear. Not of the organization chasing us, not even of what we might find at the end of the tunnel. It was a fear that came from within, a fear of losing what she had found. A fear of losing me before she had even allowed herself to fully accept that she wanted me. When the tunnel finally opened into a wider cavern, my breath caught. The space was eerily beautiful, a hollow beneath the earth where tree roots hung down like frozen strands of hair and thin beams of sunlight filtered through cracks above, illuminating the cavern in pale gold. In the center sat an old railway maintenance cart, rusted but intact, sitting on what looked like a forgotten stretch of tracks leading into darkness. Mrs. Arden rested against the stone wall, catching her breath. "This line was abandoned before you were born," she whispered. "Liana used it when she needed to disappear without leaving footprints." Rowan ran her hand along the edge of the cart, her brow furrowed. "If we use this, we'll be miles away before the organization realizes which direction we took." I stared at the tracks disappearing into the abyss, a chill running down my arms. "Where does it lead?" Mrs. Arden looked at me with a tenderness that softened the sharp lines of her face. "To the last place your aunt called home." The idea felt surreal, that my aunt had lived an entire secret life, while I grew up unaware that every choice she made was tethered to my existence. My chest tightened with a mix of grief and gratitude, the kind that twists into a painful knot because it's too late to change anything, but not too late to finally understand. Rowan helped Mrs. Arden climb onto the cart while I stood frozen, staring at the compass in Rowan's hand, the symbol etched inside glowing faintly in the dim light as if reacting to the tunnel. I felt a pull not physical but emotional, like the compass was calling to something I had buried long ago. "Mara," Rowan said softly, her voice cutting through the fog of my thoughts. "Come on." I climbed into the cart beside her, and she placed her hand gently over mine. Her touch steadied the tremor in my fingers, grounding me in a way I didn't know I needed, until the cart began to roll forward, picking up speed as the tracks sloped downward into the unknown. The air grew colder as we rushed through the darkness, wind whipping against my face, carrying the faint scent of cedar and earth. I felt Rowan's arm circle around me, pulling me closer so I wouldn't lose balance, but her embrace wasn't just protective. It was instinctive, intimate, as if she needed the reassurance of my presence just as much as I needed hers. The tunnel walls blurred past us, punctuated occasionally by flashes of old brickwork, broken pipes, and the ghostly remnants of old rail infrastructure. It felt like we were moving back in time, following the same path my aunt had once taken when she knew her days were numbered and her enemies were closing in. Eventually the tracks leveled out and the tunnel widened again. The cart slowed until it rolled into a hidden underground station, small, forgotten, with moss-covered walls, broken signs, and benches turned to skeletons of wood. A single metal door stood at the far end, rusted but reinforced, as if guarding something sacred. Rowan was the first to step out, her flashlight illuminating faint words scratched into the metal. "For the one who finds her way." My breath hitched. "She left this for me," I whispered. Mrs. Arden nodded. "Liana knew they would come for her research. She knew she had to hide the truth somewhere only her compass could reach." Rowan placed her palm flat against the door. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice soft, almost reverent. I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if anyone could be, but I nodded anyway. Rowan and I pushed the door open together, and the moment it creaked wide, something inside the room shifted, dust swirling, the faintest whisper of old air greeting us like a secret resurfacing. The space inside was larger than I expected, part library, part laboratory, part sanctuary. Shelves lined the walls, filled with journals, tapes, maps, and framed photographs of cities I recognized and cities I didn't. A single desk sat in the center, papers spread across it like the abandoned thoughts of a mind that had been forced to flee mid-sentence. A blanket still hung over the back of the chair. It felt like she had left yesterday. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped into the room, overwhelmed by the scent of old paper, lavender, and something that unmistakably belonged to my aunt. A presence, a warmth, a memory preserved in air. My hands brushed the edge of her desk, trembling when my fingers landed on a small notebook with my name stamped on the cover. Not written, stamped. As if it had been prepared years ago, waiting for a moment she believed would eventually come. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages and pages of her handwriting, letters, instructions, layers of research, and personal notes about me. About what she saw in me, about why she feared the organization would come after me the moment I became old enough to understand the world beyond childhood innocence. Rowan stood close, reading over my shoulder without touching the notebook, giving me space but not distance. One page caught my eye. It was written differently, sharper, more frantic than the rest. "If she is reading this, it means time has caught us. Rowan, protect her. She is not like the others. She feels beyond the models. She chooses beyond the patterns. She is the variable they cannot predict, the truth they fear, and she will break their system if given the chance." I looked at Rowan, my chest tightening. "She trusted you," I whispered. "She trusted me because I loved her," Rowan murmured, then shook her head. "Not the way you think. I loved her mind, her courage, her refusal to bow to them. She changed me. She made me see what my work was doing to people. She saved me too." There was a trembling honesty in Rowan's voice, one that reached deep into me and settled there like a fragile truth waiting to be held gently. Before I could speak, Mrs. Arden gasped softly. She stood at a shelf near the back, holding a small device, a tape recorder, more modern than the cassettes. "There's one more recording," she whispered. Rowan and I moved toward her. My fingers brushed the device, and when I pressed the play button, static filled the room. Then her voice, my aunt's voice, emerged. Warm, calm, a voice from another time. "Myra, my compass, if you're hearing this, the world has finally reached for you. I'm sorry. I wanted to give you a life untouched by the shadows of my work, but fate is stubborn. You must listen to Rowan. She carries the pieces I couldn't finish. And she cares for you in ways I hope you will let her. She will protect you. But only you can decide the path. Your heart is the pattern breaker. Your love is the thread that rewrites what they believe to be absolute. Trust it. Trust yourself." The recording ended. Silence wrapped the room in a heavy, sacred stillness. My knees weakened, and I reached out instinctively. Rowan caught me before I slipped. Her arms wrapped around me, holding me firmly against her chest, and for a moment the fear, the running, the danger melted into something else entirely. Something human, something warm, something safe. I felt the steady beat of her heart beneath my cheek. I felt the tremble in her breath as she held me just a little too tightly. I felt the truth my aunt had spoken. Rowan cared for me in ways that terrified both of us. And in that moment I realized something with startling clarity. I cared for her too. We stayed wrapped together like that until Mrs. Arden cleared her throat gently, reminding us that time, danger, and shadow still followed us. "There's more," she said softly. "Your aunt didn't just hide research here. She hid the one thing that can unravel the organization's entire model." Rowan's eyes sharpened. "What is it?" Mrs. Arden placed her hand on a wooden chest in the corner. "The original data." Rowan inhaled sharply. "If they get this, they'll reprogram the system," Mrs. Arden finished. "Rewrite the patterns, control the next generation of behavior studies." I felt my pulse quicken. "So what do we do?" Rowan looked at me, only me. "We make a choice," she said quietly. "Not based on fear, not based on what they want, but based on who you choose to become." For the first time in my life, I understood something profound. The world wasn't waiting for someone extraordinary. It was waiting for someone willing to choose courage despite being afraid. Someone unpredictable. Someone who didn't break where she should have. My aunt believed that person was me. Rowan believed it too, and standing in the safe house my aunt had built from love and fear and hope, I finally believed it as well. But as Rowan reached for the chest to open it, footsteps echoed in the tunnel behind us, soft, controlled, approaching. Lydia had found us, and she wasn't alone. The sound of footsteps approaching the underground safe house was neither hurried nor hesitant. It was deliberate, calculated, the kind of rhythm that belonged to someone who had spent years hunting truths hidden beneath layers of silence and resistance. Rowan's hand froze halfway to the wooden chest containing my aunt's original data, and Mrs. Arden straightened her back despite the tremor in her aging hands. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, harsh and heavy, as the echo grew louder, the narrow tunnel behind us channeling every footstep like a warning carried on cold air. Rowan stepped slightly in front of me, her stance protective yet calm, her breath controlled even as the danger drew closer. I wanted to speak, to ask her what would happen next, but my voice felt locked inside my chest as the shadows in the tunnel shifted. And Lydia Shaw emerged, her figure framed by the dim light from her flashlight, her expression unreadable and her shoulders tense with the weight of decisions that had been far too heavy for far too long. She stopped at the threshold, her eyes sweeping across the abandoned safe house that had belonged to the woman she once claimed to understand. "So this is where she hid it," Lydia murmured, her voice neither triumphant nor angry, just tired, exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a war within yourself as much as against the world. Rowan moved closer to me, her presence warm and steady. "You shouldn't have followed us," she said quietly. Lydia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Rowan, you know I never had a choice." "Everyone has a choice," Rowan answered. "You just stopped choosing for yourself." Lydia's gaze flicked to the wooden chest beside us, then to the notebooks, the tapes, the remnants of my aunt's life scattered like unhealed wounds. "You think you understand her," Lydia whispered, "but you don't. You never did. You idealize her memory. You forget what she risked, what she broke." I swallowed hard. "Then tell me," I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Tell me what really happened to my aunt." For a long moment, Lydia didn't speak. She looked at me with something raw beneath her stern expression, something like regret. "Liana didn't disappear because she was running from us," she finally said. "She disappeared because she was running from what she discovered." My breath caught. Rowan stiffened. Mrs. Arden gripped the edge of a shelf as if bracing herself. "What did she discover?" I asked, unable to blink. Lydia gestured toward the chest. The data inside that box isn't just behavioral modeling. It proves something the organization has spent decades suppressing. That empathy is not a weakness in survival patterns, but the single most unpredictable strength. Rowan blinked. You mean? It means, Lydia continued, her voice trembling slightly, that Maria's patterns, your patterns, Mara, broke every model they created. You made decisions that no trauma-based system could predict. If that research was ever released, it would dismantle years of psychological manipulation used to justify control, surveillance, and fear-driven systems. My chest tightened with disbelief. All this because I'm unpredictable, Lydia shook her head. No, because you love in ways fear cannot control, because you choose compassion even when the world teaches you to protect yourself first. Your aunt believed you represented what humanity could be without generational damage, and that terrified them. The room fell silent as her words settled over us like dust finally coming to rest after a long storm. Rowan exhaled slowly, her hand brushing mine in a quiet gesture of comfort and connection that steadied the trembling inside me. What happened to her, Lydia? Rowan asked softly. The truth. Lydia's face hardened, as though she had rehearsed this moment for years. Your aunt didn't die running from us. She died protecting the last copy of her research. She lured the organization away from this safe house and destroyed everything they thought she carried. They hunted her until the night she trapped them, allowing Mrs. Arden and me enough time to hide what remained. Mrs. Arden wiped a tear from her cheek. She sacrificed herself so Mara could grow up free. Lydia nodded, her voice cracking despite her efforts to hide it. I told her not to. I told her we could find another way. But she looked at me and said, some truths must be protected by love, not fear. That was the last thing she ever said to me. My knees weakened. Rowan reached for me instinctively, her arm circling my waist as if she feared I might collapse under the weight of the truth. But instead of falling, something inside me hardened and softened at the same time, a strange fusion of grief and clarity. My aunt hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't chosen her research over me. She had chosen me over everything else. My voice trembled when I spoke again. Why did you lie? Lydia swallowed. Because the organization wanted you monitored. Because if they knew who you truly were, if they knew you inherited her anomaly, they would have taken you long before now. I tried to protect you the only way I knew how. Rowan stepped forward, anger sparking in her voice. By hunting her, Lydia closed her eyes. By playing the part they expected of me, by staying close enough to sabotage them when I could, by keeping her trail hidden. Her gaze settled on me with a quiet sorrow. And by watching you grow into the one thing they never predicted, a woman who could break them. Fear surged inside me, but something stronger rose with it, resolve. So what happens now? Lydia looked at Rowan, then at me. Now you make a choice. You can destroy the data and disappear forever, or you can release the truth and dismantle the system that took your aunt from you. But once the truth is out, you can never return to the life you had. I inhaled deeply, my chest rising with a courage I had never felt before. If I destroy it, will they leave us alone? Lydia hesitated. Perhaps. They fear what they can't control. They fear the unknown. And you, Mara, you are the unknown. Rowan touched my cheek, her thumb brushing my skin with a tenderness that made my heart ache. Whatever you choose, she whispered, I'll stand with you. I'll follow you anywhere, even into the dark. Her confession was soft but powerful enough to shift something inside my ribs, something long hidden, long protected, long avoided. I turned to the chest and rested my palm on the cool wood. This box held the echo of a woman who had loved me fiercely from the shadows, who had sacrificed everything to ensure I would one day stand in this exact moment with the freedom to choose my own fate. I could almost feel her presence behind me, warm, resolute, steady, a voice whispering from the past. Compass, trust your heart. And for the first time, I understood what she meant. My heart wasn't fragile. It wasn't broken. It wasn't a liability. It was the one part of me that refused to be shaped by fear. It was the part my aunt believed in. And the part Rowan saw long before I saw it in myself. I turned to Lydia. If I release the data, I asked, will it destroy them? Lydia nodded slowly. It will dismantle the foundation they built everything on. It will expose their methods. It will free future generations from their reach. Rowan stepped closer, her hand finding mine. You won't be alone, she whispered. Not anymore. I took a breath that felt like reclaiming oxygen I had been denied for years. Then we release it, I said softly. Not for revenge, not for rebellion, for freedom. For truth, for her. Lydia's shoulders lowered with something like relief. Then I will stand with you, she said, her voice steady, for Liana's sake and for yours. The rest unfolded like a quiet storm, Rowan and I scanning every page of my aunt's research, uploading the data to encrypted digital servers, transferring her findings to independent journalists, scientists, academic networks. Lydia redirected the organization's surveillance patterns, feeding them false leads until the truth was already out of their grasp. Mrs. Arden prayed quietly in the corner, whispering blessings for the woman she once called friend and for the legacy she left behind. By the time we finished, dawn had returned, a new morning stretching itself across the horizon, pale and soft. Rowan and I stood at the threshold of the safe house as sunlight filtered through cracks in the old bricks, warming the space like a gentle embrace. Lydia walked toward us, her expression no longer cold, no longer hard. "It's done," she said simply. "They'll come after me now, not you." Rowan nodded with solemn understanding. Lydia turned to me one last time. "Your aunt was right," she whispered. "You were always meant to lead the way out." Then, without waiting for gratitude or forgiveness, she disappeared back into the tunnel, her footsteps echoing until they became part of the silence. Rowan took my hand, and this time it wasn't protective or hesitant. It was sure, certain, connected. "Where do we go now?" I asked quietly. Rowan smiled, her eyes warm with something deeper than fear, deeper than duty. "Wherever you want," she said softly. "The life ahead of you is yours to choose, no models, no predictions, just you." I leaned against her gently, feeling her warmth and strength steady my breath. "Are you staying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rowan's hand slid up my arm, her touch soft yet certain. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured. "Not unless you ask me to." My chest swelled with emotion, gratitude, grief, hope, and something tender blooming inside me like a truth I had been too afraid to name. "Then let's go," I whispered. "Let's choose something real." And together, we stepped out of the underground shadows and into the warm light of a world that finally felt like it belonged to us. Unpredictable, unfinished, unafraid. A world where love, not fear, became the compass. A world my aunt had wanted me to find. A world Rowan and I would face side by side. And for the first time, I didn't need directions. Because I finally understood. I wasn't the one who needed to be guided. I was the guide. I was the compass. And I was home.